What's good, YouTube? Just a casual nerd here, back again with another video. And today we're going to talk about how I would bring mutants into the MCU. Okay, so you may have heard recently about the ending of Miss Marvel, of how they kind of introduced the quote-unquote mutant gene, or how basically Miss Marvel is a mutant instead of a Inhuman, I guess, like she was in the comics. So it got me thinking about how I personally would introduce the mutants and I guess more importantly the X-Men into the current MCU verse. I know we've seen Professor X in Multiverse of Madness, so I know he's kind of technically been already introduced in the MCU in a kind of weird kind of way. But I'm mainly talking about the main MCU verse that we've been following since, the first Iron Man movie, so this current universe. Now, this particular explanation or theory or whatever you want to call it may seem very far-stretched. I know. It's going to seem kind of crazy. If you disagree or you just have a better theory, or if you want to just add to this theory that I'm about to explain in just a moment, feel free to drop a comment down below. But alright, with no further ado, let's get right into it. So how would I bring the mutants into the MCU, you may ask? It's simple, really. They were always there. Yes, I know what you're thinking. There's no way that they could always have been there. We've seen like 20 something Marvel movies, and they've never been mentioned, and they've never been seen technically. So how have they always been there? Well, that explanation is also pretty simple, and that would be through Cerebro. Now we know that Professor X, kind of more so in the Fox verse, he was able to kind of access like mutants, and then also access humans, like of course on a mental level through Cerebro. So this is what I would have happen. Kind of very similar to, Inception. If those of you who are familiar with Christopher Nolan films, you may have seen the Inception films with Leonardo DiCaprio. But in this theory, what I would have Professor X do is kind of do something similar to what Leonardo DiCaprio did in the Inception film, is that he maybe got his original X-Men team exposed into the human population by saving them maybe back in the 70s or 80s, and this caused a catastrophe. A lot of mutants were getting persecuted. So his plan, at this young Xavier, his plan was to, after creating Cerebro, is to plant one simple idea in the minds of all humans, and that idea is that mutants don't exist. Yes, I know some of you may think that's a little far-fetched, or you think that's kind of a cop-out. Well, it kind of is a cop-out, but I'm not part of the Fox business or the Disney business, so that's kind of beyond us. It is what it is of why the mutants haven't technically been in the MCU this long. There's some technical behind the scenes things, but think about it. In No Way Home, Doctor Strange already kind of showed that in the MCU you can affect, basically I'm assuming at a planetary level, affect their memory of a grand scale of people. So I'm kind of just taking that same concept and applying it to Professor X, except he's not using a spell, he's using his innate mutant ability, of course enhanced by Cerebro. Kind of do the same thing, except he's doing it for mutants, planning a different idea. Other than making them forget one person, he's making them kind of forget or not realize that mutants exist. And because of that idea that was planted, anytime anyone sees anything related to mutants, or accidentally sees mutant use their ability, it automatically creates some type of cognitive dissonance in between what they see with their eyes and what their brain perceives to be true. Is that they just don't see mutants for what they are, which is mutants. Now, how that works on a visual level, I don't know. I'll leave that to Disney to figure out. But basically, we're just taking the same idea, the same premise that has already been shown to be a thing in the MCU, and kind of just moving it a step forward and applying it to mutants, and using just a different character who is very powerful as well in his own right. They just don't use magic; they use their own innate mutant abilities. Now you may be wondering, then what causes this to be undone, or what was the reason that now mutants would exist, or at least people would know that they exist? Well, that's pretty simple as well. What I picture is that after the events of Endgame, you'll have a lot of X-Men members, tell Professor X that, the people of Earth need to know that we exist, need to know that we can actually help, or be known to actually help, that we can be that people are now accepting of people with powers, like the everyone that's on Avengers. They would kind of tell Professor X that hey, they're building, they're building statues of these heroes that we can be looked at as heroes. Now, of course, Professor X would probably push back on it, since he already has a history with facing humankind before he, said mutants don't exist. So he'll probably push back on this. He would try to explain to his young X-Men members that when I had my own team of X-Men back in the 70s or 80s, we were ridiculed, we were pushed out, we were chastised. But again, his current team, maybe with Jean Grey, Cyclops, I'm sure Wolverine would probably be indifferent about it, but they would kind of push back on this idea, saying that the world is ready, and probably eventually convince them that the world need to know that mutants do exist, that we are not their enemy. And eventually I could picture him caving in and going back to Cerebro and unimplanting his original idea that he planted, and just by simply saying mutants exist. Now, of course, this will cause some type of hysteria once parents to start seeing that their kids having these different abilities, or showing these different abilities that they didn't realize were actually there before. Because so of course, I think how it works is that gene passes through. I believe they said the father's gene or something kind of weird like that. But parents are starting to notice that their kids are a part of this mutant base, and then of course there'll be news people that can do how like Marvel likes to do, have things on the news to kind of move plot points, but they'll kind of show the hysteria that mutants exist and they're among us. It was like they'll kind of question what happened, what spurred this. Was it the Infinity Stones? Was it Thanos? With little to their knowledge, they've always been there. And with Professor X using Cerebro, he just basically unveiled it. Now, again, that begs the question of where are they doing certain events and doing the Battle of New York. And the thing is, the world is a vast place. I mean, the United States itself is a vast place. They could be dealing with things on the West Coast, or just dealing with other issues. Some dealing with, intra-mutant or relations, or mutant issues, or, fighting Magneto. Magneto could be angry about what Charles did and want to, try to convince him to undo it, or he forcefully try to convince him to undo it. Anything like that. But again, the United States is a vast place. The world is a vast place. They could have been doing a number of other things, but they could still have, intertwined. But people in the Avengers, or characters we've already seen, may not have recognized said mutants as mutants. Like take Captain America, for example. They could have him maybe have fought with Wolverine back in one of those world wars, which one he fought in. And Captain America just may not have known that Logan was a mutant. He didn't know that he had abilities. And for their first movie that they show up in the MCU, I think you would have to first deal with those ramifications of everyone knowing that there are mutants. So they have to it has to be kind of an uneasy thing, even though they've accepted, the heroes. Most of the heroes, they kind of were made by accident, but having them accept that they're just people in their everyday lives that, may have abilities that they don't know if they have good intentions or not, it could start being more of a fearful thing. So that could be one part of the movie. But I think the main villain of the film, which I hate they would have to use one of these main two, but would have to be either Magneto or William Stryker. I would say they could go the Magneto route if they want to kind of show, hey, there's mutants, but they're mutants like Magneto who want to kind of show that they're superior, or who basically has a kind of this god complex, who most normal people will fear. This is the quote unquote mutant to fear, or why we should fear them. Or you can have William Stryker, who kind of rises up in like the I don't know, some kind of a special military unit, and he's been charged with trying to round up mutants to figure out what's going on, or what percentage of the population is actually mutants. Now, I know Professor X using Cerebro to simply almost brainwash or undo the brainwashing, and that's how the mutants are introduced into MCU, because they were quote unquote already there. I know it kind of seems like a cop out, but we've seen some I think worse cop out things in the MCU. I mean, we had Doctor Strange again erase the memories of people, or erase basically Peter Parker's identity, even though that basically literally undid the ending of Spider-Man 2. We just saw in Thor: Love and Thunder that there's an entity out there called Eternity, which can literally grant any wish or any desire that you want. That could have possibly been a cop out. And let's not forget, we also now have America Chavez, who can cross different multiverses with just her ability, basically like to punch an atmosphere and go to a different multiverse. And with that being said, we also have all these multiple timelines and multiple universes. So with the universe expanding to this much of an extent, I don't think Professor X just simply using Cerebro to unveil that mutants have always existed. They just been shielded mentally from being able to see it. I really don't think that's too far of a stretch. And with the MCU currently struggling in Phase 4 to have characters or mainstay characters that we care about to lead to the next part or the next phases into like the big bad, introducing a prime X-Men team into the MCU, I think is their best bet. And of course, you can have some flashbacks in there to kind of see how they experience certain things through their eyes or through their experiences or what they even did during that time. You can still do that, but I think now's the time to bring the X-Men in. Now, all that might seem like a stretch or might seem like a cop-out, but what are you even listening to me for anyway? I'm a casual. Cue the outro.